Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another investigation video with the little gogs. Today's investigation is about someone you have definitely heard of, whether you remember his name, whether you don't, Bryan Stars. You'll probably recognize him for his iconic look in the emo scene. Saying from the emo scene whilst looking like, this is strange to outsiders. But to insiders, this look was very, very iconic. This was the look that made him him. It was his image. The blue shirt, the curly blonde hair, him. It was him. It was Bryan Stars. We all knew him. If you saw an interview, you knew that was Bryan Stars. From what I have gathered from my research is that this look kind of created a safe space. When he was in his prime, before everything, his look created like a sort of message that would say, in a way it would say to other people, you are you, no matter what, in your emo scene, you are you. I don't know if I'm saying this right, I might edit this bit out just because it doesn't make sense from what I'm saying. Anyway, Bryan Stars, or better known as Brian O'Dell, is an American musician, and YouTuber, formerly known for his more successful career as a musician interviewer. You will have seen at least one of his interviews if you kept up with the music scene around Warped Tour, or when bands like Black Veil Brides, Pierce the Veil, like Sleeping with Sirens, Motionless in White even, when they were all touring, like before COVID, when they were all touring the world non-stop, he would interview those bands, ask some very questionable, suggestive questions, and, people thought it was funny, it was different, it was new, it was unique, it was a different kind of interview. It wasn't the same stereotypical question. It was always something new, something fresh in a way, but it was always teetering on too much. Some of these questions were, how does it feel to be the hottest male, female, this person, whatever, on your current tour or in Warped Tour? And he would say that to a lot of the musicians, which, I don't know, depending on the person, it can be a bit much. Then there would be questions, it's the iconic question that you all might recognize. If you were a porn star, what would your porn star name be? And what would your, catchphrase be? That was something he asked in every single interview. Now, yeah, it's a different question, and for some people that can be fun, but if you don't know your audience, or if you don't know your interviewee, that question can be a bit much. Right off the bat, it's just too much, it's coming on strong. Especially since some of those musicians were women. It's, as a guy, it's something you shouldn't really be asking women unless you are friends with them, because it comes off as a bit creepy. And although we know different now about his sexuality, people on those tours didn't know anything about his sexuality at the time, so all they knew is face value. There is not really a structure to this video. I have watched a couple of rise and fall videos, and I don't really do rise and fall videos, so I'm just going to go with my flow. Usually in my structure, I will do like an introduction, then go straight into Twitter, Reddit, Tumblr, and then any evidence. Bryan Stars, or Brian O'Dell, was born in Japan. Even though he's not Japanese, his parents were quite religious and they delivered him in Japan. He was raised there for about 5 or 6 years. He learned how to speak both English and Japanese. However, he was not fluent in English, if my sources are correct. He was this white, blonde, curly-haired child who moved over to the States, who couldn't speak English properly with a Japanese accent. He was a little bit of an outcast. Whilst growing up, he was closeted, which is quite unfortunate, and even though we are going to get into the controversies, there are sometimes some parts of his story where I do feel pity for him, and I do empathise with him, because growing up as an outcast, being bullied, and then dealing with your sexuality, it's not fun. It doesn't make anything that he did right, but it's still something you can empathise with as a human being. I did briefly mention that he became famous for his interviews. When he was in school, he developed a fondness for videography and stuff like that, and I'm pretty sure he came third in like a contest and won some money, which is great. Well done to him. That's where his love for interviewing and videography would take off, and he would go on these Warped tours to interview bands and follow these bands on their tours to get the scoop, I guess, if that's the right phrase. Unless you were at the tours, it was difficult to get in contact with these bands at the time, because back then it was very different to what it is now. You didn't have like an agent to reach out to get like the band's details and to arrange a time. You just had to be there. I'm just going through my notes. He was there from the early 2010s. He became famous on YouTube for awkward comedic interviews with prominent alternative metalcore bands like Asking Alexandria and Black Veil Brides. The Black Veil Brides interviews, specifically with Andy Biersack, were the ones that were the favourites because of the back and forth with Bryan and Andy. It did really well. There was a specific interview that it did not go well at all for Bryan Stars, but it did in terms of his career. The interview was awful. Never Shout Never. The Never Shout Never interview, it went awfully. You can find the interview online, I believe, and Never Shout Never were terrible to Bryan, to the point where he was broken afterwards, close to tears, and cut the interview. It was so intense to the point that bands like Kellen from Sleeping with Sirens and Andy Biersack were putting out public tweets, reaching out to him, atting him, saying, like, we're sorry on the behalf of the band. This isn't what we represent. You are a great person. I'm so sorry for it. And the band actually had to come out and apologise to Bryan, claiming they were on acid. I don't think that's... feel however you want about him, but nothing had come out at this point. At this point, he was just an awkward interviewer who asked a few questionable questions, who did ask some questions that were a bit too suggestive and sexual. But other than that, nothing else had come out, and he was just an awkward interviewer who wore a blue shirt. For that kind of reaction, it was a bit over the top in my opinion. It was too much for what it was. I don't think he deserved that backlash, especially since nothing came out at that point. He was just a guy doing interviews. Yeah, if the questions were too sexual, the band could have asked him to tone it down, or said they weren't comfortable with those questions, but no, they went straight to basically bullying him and tearing apart his character. I do have some notes here that it was his biggest interview. It was covered by New York Times magazine, and he drove 7 hours to go to that interview when he was supposed to go to a Black Veil Brides interview instead. So he dropped the Black Veil Brides interview to travel 7 hours for Never Shout Never, just to be treated like shit. This was a turning point, for better and for worse, because this interview blew him up quite quickly. A lot of fans would see him backstage and reach out to him. They would show their loving support for him as an individual who stood out in a scene that already stands out. He stood out in his blue shirt, blonde curly hair, in a scene of people who only wore black and like straightened their hair and dyed their hair. And people showed their love and support for him, and he kind of blew up very quickly. And he realised that people do care about him. The people who loved and cared for him kind of blew him up so quickly that he didn't know the extent of how much he could show, I guess. Is this making sense? He kind of blew up too quick for his own good, if that makes sense. Because I think from there, he did make his own YouTube channel, and that's when things kind of went to shit. He thought, it's not a bad thing that he thought this, but he thought that people would want to see more of him, even though he blew up from the the interviews. So he made his own YouTube to show more of him. And that's not a bad assumption to make, but people wanted him for the interviews. I do have a lot of notes that I've made, so I'll be going back and forth through the notes that I wrote down. There is a point that he would go on tour to follow these bands, to interview them. If this is the notes that I'm gathering, I made these at like 4 a.m, by the way. So I can correct myself. This is where, I'm sure you're all aware of Johnny Gilbert. He met Johnny Gilbert at one of his own shows. Johnny Gilbert was 15 at the time. 15. He hired Johnny Gilbert as like a YouTuber under his management, under Bryan's management. That's when he would be more of a YouTuber than an interviewer. At that point, he took 20% of Johnny's earnings, as well as his own earnings from YouTube, and that's kind of where everything goes to shit. There is a few videos that Johnny has put up talking about this, but again, he was 15 at the time. Bryan would do hypersexual content with him, joking about some very intimate topics, and would make him... This is in America, by the way. In America, the drinking age is different. I think the drinking age is 21 in America. But even still, if it was in the UK, the drinking age is 18, so it's still underage. He would buy alcohol and force alcohol upon Johnny and make him drink whilst being 15, 16. But he noticed how successful this YouTube career would be for the time being, and hired a few more YouTubers under his management, where again he would collect 20% of their personal income on top of his own income. They kind of made this is like back in the era of like YouTube groups. They'd be called My Digital Escape, or MDE. Unfortunately, the start of the downfall would be one of the YouTubers included in MDE is Austin Jones, a convicted sex offender. Unfortunately, Bryan knew of the allegations and covered up for the allegations. In a few of his videos, Johnny Gilbert does talk about how he would go to Bryan Stars, and Bryan would dismiss the allegations against Austin and kind of give Austin tips and advice on how to cover up the allegations and like remove himself from the allegations. These allegations involved minors, by the way, and it's not nice. I know eventually Austin got arrested and convicted for 10 years in prison, which Bryan tried to cover up and, you know, prove the innocence of, but, you know, they all lived together. And again, Johnny was like a minor at the time when all this was going on, so I'm pretty sure this started an argument between everyone under MDE, where Johnny admitted that Bryan Stars would attempt to hit him, because an argument started over everything really. Everything blew up all at once. There was the Austin situation, there was Bryan taking 20% of everyone's profits, Bryan forcing them to do content that they didn't want to do, forcing queer baiting. He would force Johnny to kiss someone that he would then date on camera for the first time. He would have his first kiss on camera, which is very awkward to say and do. A lot of the YouTubers, again, a lot of them were underage, whilst forcing them to queer bait. He would sell the idea of suicide, even though Johnny had spoken openly about wanting to off himself, and then profit off the merch that he would then make, which is terrible. And then forcing the group to then go on a tour when not all of them made music. I think like 2 or 3 of them made music. And this was without their consent. He just sprung it on them like one day, saying, oh yeah, we're all going on tour. They all kind of kicked off, and I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. After that, MDE ended, and he forced, pretty sure, Alex and Johnny to sit there in the awkward interview video, saying that MDE would be no more. Ever since then, Bryan has tried to sue the ex-members for slandering whenever they'd make videos, talking about their experience with him. He did try to remake MDE 2.0 with the same YouTube channel that the other members had worked so hard to build, using other influencers such as Social Repose and Eugene Akuni. Luckily it didn't happen. With all of this, he does like to prophesize off of minors, exploit minors, and from what I've gathered as well, he likes to get the minors to drink. There was an incident in which he would be overly touchy-feely with Johnny, whilst forcing Johnny to be intoxicated, or being intoxicated himself. We'll get into that in a little bit. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. He managed these young YouTubers, taking a huge percentage of their money, whilst Johnny lived with him as well, so he kind of had no choice but to do what he said, and then covered up for a sex offender. It's just a lot of things that he did wrong, was trying to manage them in a way. Like, manage them. I think he should have stuck with the interviews and not gone into YouTube. Like, yeah, like, the interviews were posted on YouTube, but I think that's where he should have stayed. My Digital Escape, and especially Austin Jones, is where everything really tumbled off the earth. Sticking up for a convicted sex offender, being all weird and touchy-feely with Johnny Gilbert, it's nothing that you could ever look past or forgive. The interview, I can look past and forgive because that wasn't his fault. Everything else, that's too much. I know a few years ago he did try to... A lot of people think this was to start afresh and do like a rebrand where he came out, and people said it was to clear his name. I'm not sure. I kind of do think it was to also cover his tracks and be like, oh yeah, you can't hate me if I'm gay. That gay people hate each other all the time. These are the notes that I made from watching the Rise and Fall videos and from doing some research myself. The conclusion I made from these notes is that he just exploits minors and is a little bit creepy towards minors, especially standing up for a convicted sex offender who exploited minors in a different way. Maybe there's a reason he stood up for him, maybe the call comes from inside the house, just saying. There are some articles that I might get into at the end that go into a few more details. The selling side situation, I do have the shirt design, I'll put it on screen. He did put out a tweet. I think a lot of people are getting caught up on the design and forgetting the words on the shirt. Self-love, not self-harm. I made the shirt because I wanted people to have a shirt they could wear to proudly show they had made the choice to not self-harm. Clearly this shirt is not for everyone, but just because you personally don't like it or think it's offensive doesn't mean every person or person who has struggled with self-harm will feel the same way. First of all, he made money off this t-shirt after talking to Johnny and a few other people who struggled with suicide. Only after the backlash did he offer to donate money to suicide charities. This is only allegedly that he donated as well, but he never offered to donate money until he got caught in this controversy. He was profiting off it from the beginning, and then only offered to donate after being called out. Lastly, if you think I am insensitive to the issue of self-harm, you are misinformed. My best friend Johnny struggled with it, but you didn't. Several members of MDE have also struggled with it, and I have met thousands of kids over the years on tour who have told me their story of self-harm. The issue is very real to me. I understand that you can experience it through other people, but it just feels so weird being like, oh yeah, I've seen it through other people, so I get it. You can empathize, but you don't know what it's like to do it to yourself. I made this shirt because I love the message. I have always been about spreading positivity. I'm sorry some of you have been offended by... He basically said, I'm sorry that you're offended. Ouch. I don't blame you. You are 100% entitled to your opinion. However, I do ask that you understand why I made the shirt. The shirt's tacky. If you are a victim of self-harm, I wish you all the best in working through it. I in no way meant to bring you down in any... Bring you any down... Okay, the last sentence is very botched. It doesn't make sense, but he didn't mean to bring anyone down. Right. First of all, the shirt message is tacky. It's awful. And second, you're prophetizing off other people's experiences, not your own. And then you are prophetizing off it. You're not giving any money to charity, and you only offered to give money after you were called out. And we don't know if you did give money. There was no proof. You just claimed you did. Plus, it just feels weird prophetizing off other people's private life experiences. I just wanted to quickly point out that the last thing he ever posted was July 29th, 2017. July 29th, 2017. That's the last thing he ever posted, so he's gone like MIA from social media for a while. Maybe that's good for his mental health, and maybe that's good for young people. I'm just gonna quickly go into some Reddit stuff. There might be some more information, there might not, but I did make some notes based off it as well. When someone asked, has anyone heard anything recently from Bryan Stars? He had some super shady contracts with the members of MDE, yep, where he would take 20% of their profits. One of the original members, Austin Jones, convicted pedophile, and allegedly Bryan knew and tried to cover it up. Yep, he knew everything, and he didn't just cover it up, he gave advice to Austin on how he can work around the allegations and carry on creating content and just get the allegations dropped in a way. Bryan was in his mid-20s and his 16-year-old best friend was living with him. Yeah, Johnny was living with him from a very young age. He knew him from 15, moved in around that age, 15, 16. So he was very much a minor. Living with a mid-20s guy who got him drunk. He got him drunk quite a few times, illegally of course, because you can't buy alcohol until you're like 21 in the States. I just think it's weird, like why would you want to live with someone who's underage unless they're a sibling? Like what are you going to talk about? Johnny made a contract with Bryan, a comment in an interview did earlier this year. I'm just skimming over it. After he went through a breakup, basically said that Bryan is still being problematic. Yeah, some people were spreading some misinformation on him, so I'm just gonna skip over the misinformation, because even if he's done like some shady shit, we don't spread misinformation. Yeah, he may have been creepy towards Johnny and been a bit of a creep by defending a convicted sex offender, but we don't make up shit, okay? We only serve facts here. I do have some videos that I'm gonna look at over here, but real quick, I do have something fun. Someone talked about, like, in that Reddit, that he's still being weird towards Johnny after all these years, and I just wanted to highlight this. He messaged Johnny like a few years ago, but I'm pretty sure this is like way after the whole like MDE breakup and like Johnny moved on. He said, "Hey Mr. 6 inches, are you just bored and craving attention? Stop posting me on your channel for views, thanks." And then Johnny tweeted it saying, "Hey Bryan Stars, I have you blocked already. Stop making up lies about people and body shaming my friends. You're a creep and I'm not scared of you. Grow up, you're 30 years old. Remember forcing me to drink at 16 and hiding the fact that I lived with you? Nobody knew that Johnny lived with Bryan. He actually kept it a secret, which is very weird. If you're not ashamed of something or worried about something, why are you keeping it a secret?" And then later, I had to block him again. "Dude's crazy, don't text me anymore." That is the next tweet. And then he replied to Bryan, sorry, I'm struggling with these colours. "Feel free to send me more of your drunk messages from a different number because I already blocked this one, creep." That was from Johnny. And then Bryan would then text back saying, "Just don't ask to..." It's going to be on screen. You can just... And the answer is still no, Johnny. "Trust me, no one would ever want that. Remember, don't beg underage people to drink again." And then Bryan put, "Have fun living with mummy. You asked to do this to me. I said no, and it will never happen, you emo pop star wannabe. Bye-bye." And Johnny would put, "Are you on drugs or just brain dead?" It sounds like he's coping. Like, he's inhaling the copium and drinking at the same time. It's weird. I am gonna get into some videos that we can watch together. So, let's shift the perspective. We can watch them together. Oh, this one's not a video. This is just something from a screenshot from the video that I think is really weird. Don't you? Anyway.
Look at this. Could you imagine? Like, I was a kid, so I would do whatever. I was probably 15, living at his house, 16. I was probably 16 during this. And I was living at his house because it was either that or apparently I talked to my mom recently about it, and it was either I was very depressed and shit and going through stuff. So I was either going to be, I eventually somehow got to meet Bryan, convince him to like him try to help me become a YouTuber. It was either that or I would get sent to military school because I was not going to regular school and I was having a lot of depression episodes and my dad died and I was going through all this shit. So it was either like do this or like I got the opportunity, and this was before everyone thought people could be like creeps, really. We didn't really think about that too much. But like he fucking with a 15-year-old or whatever, 16-year-old was filming videos, big penis, dirty whisper challenge. Like what the fuck, man? Like I would not do that now. It's crazy how times have changed, man. That's fucking wild. And I was encouraged to do this shit. And then also during this time, I was the first product of what he started to manage, which meant he would take 20% of our income from everything we would make. So me being this young, he started taking 20% of every little dollar I started making. And then we eventually start having more people incorporated into our lives, which he also started taking percentages from.
Hey, that was from like a video from Johnny Gilbert, of course, like you can see him in the corner, where he talks about his experience living with Bryan Stars, because he's reacting to someone doing a rise and fall video. Essentially, he just gives his personal experience from what he can remember. I think it is important for me to include these because he was living with Bryan, again, in secret because no one knew. He didn't tell anyone. Bryan didn't tell anyone. Again, Johnny was a minor at the time. He was 15, 16, and the nature of those videos is so weird. Like, even if you wanted to do those videos, why would you do it with a minor? Why would you do it with someone underage? It's so weird. And if I remember right, Johnny was sleeping on the couch at the time, so he was just kind of there. But then being forced to drink as well, it's like he's kind of exposed. It's creepy to think about in detail, and I don't like it. And I do feel so bad for him. But it is important for me to include these snippets that I've screen recorded, because I think it does kind of paint the picture, especially from someone who was in the situation. There is another one that I'm gonna include super quick. So, and then we can give our 2 cents.
I'll speak about. He like, yeah, I've brought it up before, but he like literally tried to wrestle while he was really drunk. And he would like purr on my neck. And he went, and I was like, what the fuck, dude? That was the weirdest thing he's ever done to me. 18 or so. I was like, that's fucked up. That's not like cool. That's weird. It was weird. And I was like, I don't want to wrestle you, dude. I'm a fucking adult. Like, what the fuck? Like, I wasn't an adult. I was a kid. I was like 18, but I was like, I'm too cool for that. Like, what the fuck, dude? The only other thing he did that was like obviously just super out of pocket was giving me drinks. And like he did this with other people as well, but he gave me drinks. I'll speak about when I was 17 or so, and he would like give me drinks he would pour drinks and hand them to me, and I'd be like, I'm good. And he'd pour them and hand them to me. And he also didn't like let people know that I lived with him. Like, no, his parents didn't know I lived with him. The only people that knew that I lived with him was my family. His family didn't know. Where'd I sleep? I slept on the couch that we would film videos on. And for the most part, it was fun. And like, he wasn't like, I don't know, he wasn't that weird. But now looking at it as an adult, it's just like weird.
I think in the moment for him, it didn't seem weird because he needed the place to live. Like he did mention, he was either going to go to military school or stay with him. So in the moment, he was kind of just wearing rose-tinted glasses, I think the phrase is. Not looking for the red flags, not looking for the warning signs, but realistically, looking back now, he can possibly see all of the bad, intricate details, like forcing a minor to drink, living with someone who's overage whilst you're underage, keeping it a secret, nobody knows, doing overly sexual stuff all the time, forcing them to do overly sexual things. It's weird. Like, the whole, like, purring on the neck thing, that's too much. Even if at the time he was 18 and technically it's legal, it is non-consensual, and he could have been 17 at the time, but he did say he was 18. But even then, it's non-consensual, and I'm fairly sure Johnny is straight, so back off. These are boundaries that you set with your friends, and if you set the boundary that you don't do that with your friends, you don't do that with your friends. That's how consent works. And even then, like, I have, like, different types of consent with my friends, and I wouldn't do that with my friends unless they asked, and even then, it's like, let me double check. It's just so weird. And by the way, I don't have underage friends because I'm not a freak. What do you talk about if someone's underage? You have to return them home when the streetlights go on? That's so weird. There's only so much I could say about this other than it's weird. Because it really is. It's so strange. It's weird. The idea of living with a minor in general is strange. But then being touchy-feely, over-the-top, sexual, making innuendos, making jokes, making them do the innuendos jokes to you, with you, for you, basically. It's just too much. And then you get to the whole, like, Austin Jones situation where he knows. Like, he's seen the videos, he's seen the evidence. He still doubles down and defends him, protects him. Even though my guy's been arrested, and he's like, yeah, but the profits. The profits are not more important than your fans' safety. The safety of your fans should be the top priority. Forget about the 20% that you're taking and exploiting from these people. Like, yeah, exploit it from the pedophile, but still, the safety of your fans always comes first. I've said this before, but he was making his own money on top of that. Like, from his own YouTube channel, from MDE, and taking 20% of their earnings. It's just not right. Because there was quite a lot of them as well. I think there was like 5 or 6 of them. That's like 100, 120%. There's so much money that he's earning for just being there and exploiting people. There are some other like subtle red flags in his behavior as well. Being close with Blood on the Dance Floor. There are some videos where he's done like a load of interviews with Blood on the Dance Floor after the investigations, after the convictions, and he's like really close with them. He's very, I think it's weird, but other people might not. Like in his Twitter, he's got more replies than posts, and he's very talkative to his fans where he's like, thank you so much, love heart, I appreciate you, love heart, just followed you, love heart. There's quite a lot of them, to the point it's like, okay, back up a little bit, make sure you know that your fans are overage before you start following them and sending them hearts and all that stuff. Like, it's okay to care about your fans, but, you know, considering that you were touching and all over a minor before and you defended a sex offender, I'd be careful of how you. All these things added on top of each other just kind of creates a big pile of nope. I have just remembered that I have some links. I think the links do kind of just sum up what I've talked about though. Yeah, this is the Never Shout Never interview. Oh yeah, they asked to do another interview to make up for the bad one when the band was on acid. Oh, they've done 3 interviews. The second one was the one that didn't go great. Another thing that people didn't like about Bryan, this isn't as extreme, but I just got a picture. You know the iconic Bryan Stars look. He's Bryan Stars, cool. And then he does an extreme 180 as soon as he gets living with Johnny Gilbert and like doing NDE. People who loved him for his sticking out and being who he is on the inside look, he flipped it and became a product of copying everyone else. And people didn't like that because they fell in love with who he was and what his like image represented. People had issues with that too. Yeah, I'm just skimming through. Yeah, my digital escape is populated by modern day scene kids, all of which are aged 18 and under. They're cute, they love music, and they're people that other kids can look up to and laugh and get a laugh from without a large age gap, like from other bands. Bryan was 25, and their fellow members were under 18. 18 or under. The audience was like 12 to 16-year-olds. Bryan's Twitter is full of stolen Tumblr posts and band memes. He tweets about not wanting to go to school, how hot certain band members are, and other similar things that young fans can clearly relate to, even though he himself is 25. Although this in itself is uncomfortable to watch, the most upsetting thing is that his tweets involve something that rubs me the wrong way entirely, making light of mental illness. I've seen stuff like 100 likes and I won't cut tonight. There are absolutely many teens struggling with anxiety. However, I believe that kids posting unsettling memes may be doing it because they believe that as a fan it's cool to have a mental illness. Maybe Bryan is trying to be himself, but it seems like he is just trying to do whatever it takes to get more followers. These fans will grow older thinking it's okay to post fan art and photography without credit, and it's okay to romanticize mental illnesses, that it's okay to fetishize band members. Most of all, it's okay for someone in their mid-20s to show interest in minors. This is the stuff I'm reading from the interview, by the way. The article. I think his Twitter was just full of a lot of hello fellow kids stuff, which is quite dangerous when you have a lot of kids who follow you and they look up to you and then you're like, oh yeah, I am one of you, and it's like, no, you're not. You're pushing 30. You're not a kid anymore. You shouldn't be hanging out with kids. You shouldn't be all over a kid. And you shouldn't be defending someone who is into kids. The other article is just another take on the Never Shout Never interview, which, again, like, no matter what he's done, I don't think Bryan deserved the Never Shout Never interview to go the way it did. He was just the interview guy in the blue shirt. But now, like, he's kind of just the guy who defends predators, the guy who maybe was a predator because of the way he treated Johnny and the way he got Johnny drunk and was all over him. That's stuff that's up to interpretation after all the evidence. The evidence does point one way, but I don't want to make assumptions and, you know, all that stuff. The messages that he did send Johnny does, like, not work in his favour. It is a sad situation. His situation is really sad, and I do have some empathy, as a human being. It is also disappointing, and, you know, he did do it to himself. Housing a minor, not telling anyone about the said minor, getting him drunk, making him do sexual content, borderline harassing people, and then not protecting your fans and instead protecting a pedophile. Mate, it's just a lot of nope. A big lot of nope. I remember watching him when I started getting into the whole, like, alternative scene, and I remember he was the awkward guy who he did annoy me. He did annoy me, I'm gonna be honest. Because he did, like, interviews that were very clickbaity. I remember he did try to start drama between Hollywood Undead and ex-band member Deuce, and that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And his questions were very... I thought they were all very sexual, and it just made me uncomfortable. Because at the time, I was a child. I get that he wanted to take a different approach in his interviews, but a different approach does not mean sexual harassment. Especially to the person you housed. You can tell me your take, if you want. There are other videos out there, especially the ex-MDE members who have spoken about their experience in greater detail, and they explained how they were exploited. That is the words they used, and I do believe they were exploited because they had their hard work and money taken. How he was just kind of falling off the deep end anyway, and again, just defending a sexual predator. I've said it multiple times, but I'm just drilling the idea home that he did defend a sexual predator. But yeah, you can let me know if there's something I've missed. Of course, share it in the comments. Go for it. That is, like, my conclusion in a way, that he's just... It's sad. Why do people always have to be creeps? Stop it. Leave the kids alone. He should have stayed with the interviews. That seemed to be going well for him. Maybe if he stayed with the interviews, we wouldn't be here right now. Leave your thoughts below, and I'll see you in my next video. And I'll see you then, besties. Bye-bye.